The arrival in America of the renowned conductor and composer Antonin Dvorak marked the second stage in the evolution of the spiritual. It was the fabled Fisk Jubilee Singers, founded in 1871, who first introduced the genre to the country and to the world in 1873 as a choral form with their European tour and their appearance before Queen Victoria of England. Despite the singers of these tours in America and in London, some white audiences, critics, and performers ridiculed the spirituals, robbing them of their beauty and sacred nature, while black-faced minstrels substituted profane and comedic texts in a manner that made some African Americans ashamed to sing them. White and black writers and singers abruptly and erroneously labeled them slave songs, sorrow songs, and plantation songs, all inaccurate titles of derogation. Dr. Robert R. Moton, an alumnus of Hampton Institute who succeeded Booker T. Washington as principal of Tuskegee Institute, speaks of the effect white minstrelsy had on him and his valuation of the spirituals while a young man. I felt that the white men were making fun not only of our color and our songs, but of our religion. It took 3 years training at Hampton Institute to bring me to the point of being willing to sing Negro songs in the presence of white people. White minstrels with black faces have done more than any other single agency to lower the tone of Negro music and cause the Negro to despise his own songs. The timely but relatively brief stay of Antonin Dvorak as director of the National Conservatory of Music allowed him to develop a relationship with Harry Burleigh, a student at the conservatory, and to be introduced to the spirituals which Harry sang. During his 3-year period, Dvorak wrote his symphony from the New World that incorporated thematic material from the spiritual Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and utilized the pentatonic scale in the slow movement, Going Home. More importantly, Dvorak proclaimed, "In the Negro's melodies of America, I discover all that is needed for a great and noble school of music." The utilization of the material in his Symphony of the New World effectively proved this, elevated the material, and freed American composers to use it, as did George Gershwin, Morton Gould, Louis Grunberg, William Tippett, William Dawson, and others. Upon graduation, Burleigh taught at the conservatory and was baritone soloist at St. George's Church. He also worked as the music editor for recording. A gifted composer, he wrote many art songs and collected and arranged a large number of spirituals, tastefully and conservatively. His total output of arrangements and compositions is estimated from 200 300 works. He introduced African American concert singers to a wide variety of spirituals and art songs, and represented the second stage in the development of the classically arranged spiritual. And how do the conventional arrangements differ from those of Hall Johnson, who succeeded Burley in the evolution of the classical spiritual arrangement? The Burley arrangements are always tasteful, always sacred, always acceptable, but rarely unique. As a boy, I remember well my mother, a church musician, playing the standard introduction to any work that had none, the last few bars of the work. For years, spirituals were not allowed in the repertoire of many song competitions because they were considered too simple, too unchallenging. Burley's "Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child" is such a setting. But with the arrangements and compositions of Hall Johnson, this changed. The art songs of Schubert, Brahms, and Strauss represented the merging of great poetry and great music. In this respect, Johnson was greatly advantaged, for in addition to being a fine arranger and composer, he demonstrated unusual literary gifts honed by a fine education at Allen University, where his father was president, University of Pennsylvania, Juilliard, and the University of Southern California. Upon graduation from the University of Pennsylvania in 1910, he won the Simon Hester Award for the best composition for choir and orchestra. A gifted violist, Johnson studied violin with Frederick Hahn, a former player with the Boston Symphony. In New York, Johnson made a living playing with the stage bands on Broadway and on tour. He was awarded an honorary doctorate by the Philadelphia Musical Academy of 1934. In addition to a book of poetry, much of which is included in my biography of Hall Johnson, Johnson also wrote the book and script for his Broadway musical, Run Little Children, which opened in 1933 and ran for 4 months at the height of the Depression. After The Green Pastures, which opened on Broadway in 1930 with a Hall Johnson choir, won the Pulitzer Prize and became a motion picture which sold 6,000 tickets an hour when it opened at Radio City Music Hall. Black and white concert singers demanded arrangements of spirituals by Johnson. Singers like the great Marian Anderson, Carol Bryce, Inez Matthews, Lawrence Winters, Robert McFerrin, William Warfield, and Shirley Barrett found in many of the Hall Johnson concert arrangements the same elements they found in the art songs they programmed. To make the traditional spiritual a more classical and substantial form, Johnson adopted the compositional techniques of the great classical songwriters. He expanded the form of the spiritual beyond strophic, modified strophic, and through composed, using forms from simple stanza, A, uh, an example of which is his setting of crucifixion, to A-B stanza, the typical verse and refrain, as typified by City Called Heaven, to an elaborate structure in his original spiritual, Ain't Got Time to Die, which is form A1, B1, C1, A2, B2, C2, A3, B3, C3, and coda. From the classic art song, Johnson used a variety of techniques to make his arrangements interesting and effective. A partial list that would include introduction and coda, prelude and postlude, or descriptive accompanimental forms or figures, polymeters, imitation, use of thematic material in the accompaniment, exchanging thematic fragments between the voice and piano, substituting the hum or a neutral syllable for the text. One of Johnson's most popular arrangements, Ride On, King Jesus, combines very effectively a half dozen compositional techniques in the manner of the most skilled composers. The introduction is but a single measure of ascending octaves in 4/4 time, beginning on the dominant and leading to the maestro entry of the voice on the tonic.
Ride on, King Jesus, no man can...
At the end of the first period, there is an abrupt change of mood, dynamic, and meter to 2/4, where the piece will remain to the end.
For he is King of kings, he is Lord of lords.
Johnson fashions a new thematic motive from the ascending scale in the introduction, starting this time on tonic with the text, King Jesus rides in the middle of the air and creates a response with a descending figure. No man works like him. From dominant back to tonic. Johnson works in two verses between a triumphant restatement of the quarter note maestro sotti from a dramatic decrescendo at the end of the section comes a fugato led by the solo piano. Johnson marks this, piano takes over. This leads the long crescendo to the phrase, Jesus Christ, the first and last. No man works like him. As the section ends on the word him, the coda begins with the melody in the bass chords for 4 measures, followed by the frenetic triplet at the end.
He is a king, he's a lord. Oh, Jesus Christ, the first and last. No man works like him. Ride on, ride on, ride on, ride on, Jesus.
I'm often asked, who is the greatest arranger, Paul Johnson or William Dawson? I answer the question with another. Who is the greatest classical songwriter, Schubert, Brahms, or Strauss. I must say, however, that Johnson touches me with an inward and external joy that Dawson does not. Perhaps these two works that represent the epitome of internal joy as expressed by Johnson, Old Glory and City Called Heaven, are ideal. Both are so simple, yet so touching. The prelude and postlude of Old Glory recalls Schubert's setting of Heine's Am Meer. The mood of the piece is captured perfectly with only two chords repeated. After the drama of the clouds and the tears, the same mood is recaptured by the use of the same chords.
Das Meer erglänzte weit hinaus im letzten Abendscheine. Mich hat das unglückselige Weib vergiftet mit ihren Tränen.
Johnson precedes his use of the two-chord formula with the final phrase of the song, but emphasizes the significance of the chords by repeating them 3 times, a total of 4 measures, including the tied note. While Johnson begins this arrangement with a voice entering a cappella for an entire measure, on the repeat of the refrain, he reaches back to the 13th century for an isometric technique that fluidly allows him to pass the 16th note pattern in Glory seamlessly through the accompaniment, building excitement all the while as it softens in the last 2 measures before the fermata and in anticipation of the final and most intimate hum chorus. The final refrain is sung on a hum. In my own performances, I always use an ooh, as the vocal sound is freer and more beautiful on the highest note. Johnson is unique among the spiritual arrangers in his use of the hum, as he does effectively in his arrangements of Old Glory and Fix Me Jesus. Why the hum? Johnson seems to have understood something that the other arrangers intimate avenue of expression, and an analysis of the spiritual prepared for a recital of Donnie Ray Albert at the NACS convention in Boston, I explained the hum experience as Hall Johnson did. He spoke of hearing his grandmother working in the kitchen and singing to herself. As she continued, she had a visitation by the Holy Spirit, and the presence overcame her. She left the kitchen and came outside and sat on the steps weeping. She had gotten happy. It is not possible to extract the essence of this song unless you have had such an experience. Certainly, in the final chorus, when the neutral syllable soars up to the highest note in the free improvisation, one must feel something, just as one does when the hum grows softer and softer before returning to the text at the very end. The opening chords become softer yet when they return. The performance you will hear is from a live recital by Eugene Thamon Simpson at Rowan University. The accompanist is Lawrence Wick. Perhaps there is nothing more characteristic of Schubert's song than the descriptive accompaniment. Unlike Hall Johnson, Schubert generally used a single figure throughout. Such songs quickly come to mind. The rippling waters, as in Wohin and Liebesbotschaft.
Ich hört ein Bächlein rauschen wohl aus dem Felsenquell, hinab zum Tale rauschen, so frisch und wunderhell.
And the galloping horse in Ölkönig. While Schubert's place as one of the greatest art song composers is without question, as a professional arranger and composer, it is far easier to create a song in which the accompaniment is based on a single motive than to set a text in which specific words and phrases are described as Hall Johnson did. In some cases, the introduction of the descriptive accompaniment is almost stunning. I think this will be obvious if we look at several Hall Johnson works that utilize this technique. Take My Mother Home was one of the original works Hall Johnson included in his Easter cantata, Son of Man, which debuted at New York City Opera with a chorus of 300 voices in 1946. Of the work's creation, Johnson writes, music by Hall Johnson, based on a fragment of an old Negro folk song from the collection of William A. Logan. Lyric based on a narrative of St. John, chapter 19, verses 26 and 27. This setting might have been the customary verse refrain, but Hall Johnson could not bring himself to write the same melody and accompaniment for nailing in the nails, as he wrote for struggling up the hill. Without warning, the accompaniment becomes hammered and dissonant, and the voice moves into the upper register.
Take my mother home. I think I heard him cry when they were nailing in the nails. I think I heard him cry. Oh, take my mother home. I'll die this day on Calvary. Wait for the die no more.
One aspect of Dvorak's dream was to see the thematic material of the spiritual used as source material for classical instrumental music. This was realized in the Negro Folk Symphony of William Dawson, which was premiered by Leopold Stokowski in 1933. Frederick Delius, Florida Suite No. 3, Around the Plantation. Morton Gould, Spirituals for Orchestra. Philip Smith, Rhapsody on Negro Spirituals. Michael Tippett, A Child of Our Time. Louis Grunberg, Emperor Jones. George Gershwin, Porgy and Bess, and Hall Johnson's extended works, Fire, The Green Pasture, Run Little Children, Spiritual Moods 1 and 2, and Son of Man. Save for Fire, all of these works were performed to great success. The Green Pastures, originally on Broadway, had a run of over 1,200 performances. Run Little Children ran on Broadway for 4 months. Spiritual Moods for male quartet and orchestra was a hit throughout Europe and South America. And Son of Man was performed at New York City Opera with 300 singers and at Carnegie Hall with 500 singers. In 2019, Dr. Roland Carter revived Son of Man in a performance by the Houston Negro Opera Chorus, which he magnanimously dedicated to me. Of all the works included in the cantata, by far the most popular remains Hall Johnson's original spiritual, Ain't Got Time to Die. Thanks to the cooperation of Hal Leonard, I was able to get this work and 9 others republished digitally 2 years ago. The solo version demonstrates amazing and distinctive features that become typical and characteristic of Hall Johnson. 1, the accompaniment requires a professional pianist because of its difficulty. 2, The accompaniment begins sparsely and simply and increases in complexity to the end. 3. Johnson elaborates on the form of the typical spiritual, going beyond the typical A-B repeat to 1 A-B, 1 B, 1 C, 2 A, 2 B, 2 C, 3 A, 3 B, 3 C, and coda. He uses fragmented phrasing. And 5, he uses the hook, which is typical and requires advanced breathing. A word about the hook. The hook is the fact that there's always an upbeat, which does not allow any time for you to breathe at the end of a section. You will find, and then Ain't Got Time to Die, half the time he doesn't finish the phrase in the voice. He finishes the phrase with a note in the keyboard. That gives the vocalist an instant to get a breath. 6, he uses an extended introduction and a coda with terminal development.
Lord, keep so busy praising my Jesus. Keep so busy praising my Jesus. Keep so busy praising my Jesus. Ain't got time to die.
If one listens carefully, 1B, which follows, is an improvisation on the melody of 1A, done in what is almost a jazz style without any loss of the sacred nature of the work. Note that it is fragmentary and that the melodic interruption is characteristic of Johnson's style. This adds to the effectiveness of Johnson's work, as it is the syncopation that is at the heart of black music. The first flight of fancy returns to earth in the final phrase. The voice does not complete the final phrase, the piano does.
Cause when I'm healing the sick, I'm praising my Jesus. When I'm healing the sick, ain't got time to die.
At the end of the second section, when the text changes to keep so busy serving my master, the accompaniment introduces a figure descriptive to illustrate that.
Oh, to keep so busy serving my master. Keep so busy serving my master. Keep so busy serving my master. Ain't got time, 'cause when I...
Here in section 2B, when I'm feeding the poor, Johnson carefully avoids the tonic and allows the tension to build. The accompaniment that started with a few thin chords is becoming fuller and more sonorous.
'Cause when I'm feeding the poor, I'm working for the kingdom. Yes, I'm working when I'm feeding the poor. Lord, I ain't got time.
Section 3 begins softly with the phrase, Lord, I keep so busy serving my master, but opens up in the voice and the piano at 3B, when the text becomes, when I'm giving my all. Not only are there full chords in the accompaniment, but Johnson inserts melodic material in the bass.
'Cause when I'm giving my all, I'm serving my master. When I'm giving my all, Lord, I ain't got time.
Section 3C concludes on a deceptive cadence and moves into an exciting and well-developed coda, which taxes vocalists and pianists to the maximum. The extreme ranges of the piano are used, much as with Debussy and Ravel, but to a totally different effect.
Oh, it takes all of my time to praise my Jesus, all of my time to praise my Lord. If I don't praise him, the rock's gonna cry out, Gloriano, ain't got time.
It is likely that a choral performance of this work that I conducted the Virginia State University Concert Choir in on April 12, 1970, was the last performance that Johnson ever heard. Though I had forgotten that he promised to attend my concert at the Church on the Hill, he strode majestically down the nave at age 82 and sat on the front row. The choir sang his choral arrangement of Ain't Got Time to Die as an encore, and he got a standing ovation. 18 days later, he was dead of smoke inhalation when he fell asleep while smoking. My sincere thanks to the Schiller Institute New York Community